Paul von Benckendorff und von Hindenburg was born in Posen, Prussia in 1847. At age 11, Paul entered the Cadet Corps school. At 16, he was transferred to the school in Berlin. He became a second lieutenant in the 3rd Regiment of Foot Guards. When the Austro-Prussian War of 1866 broke out, Hindenburg was sent out to war. During the decisive battle at Königgrätz, he was knocked unconscious by a bullet that pierced his helmet and creased the top of his skull. He was battalion adjutant when the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871 broke out. After weeks of marching, the Guards attacked the village of St. Privat. After 4 hours, the Prussian artillery came up to blast the French lines, while the infantry swept through the French lines. The Guards for the following months sat in the siege lines surrounding Paris, France. In 1873, he passed in the highly competitive entrance examination for admission to the War Academy in Berlin. After 3 years' study, his grades were high enough for appointment to the General Staff. He was promoted to captain in 1878 and assigned to the staff of the 2nd Army Corps. He married the intelligent and accomplished Gertrude von Sperling, by whom he had 2 daughters and 1 son. He was transferred in 1885 to the General Staff and was promoted to major. His section was led by Count Alfred von Schlieffen of Schlieffen Plan fame. The following year he was moved to the War Ministry to write the field service regulations on field engineering and on the use of heavy artillery in field engagements, with both being used during the First World War. He was given command of a division as a major general in 1897. In 1900, he was promoted to lieutenant general. 5 years later, he was made commander of the 4th Army Corps, based in Magdeburg, as a general of the infantry. In 1909, Schlieffen recommended him as chief of the General Staff, but he lost out to Helmuth von Moltke. He retired in 1911 to make way for younger men. He had been in the army for 46 years, including 14 years in general staff positions. When war broke out in 1914, Hindenburg was retired in Hanover. On the 22nd of August, he was selected by the War Cabinet and the German High Command to command the German 8th Army in East Prussia, with General Erich Ludendorff as his chief of staff. Upon arriving at Marienburg on the 23rd of August, Hindenburg and Ludendorff were met by members of the 8th Army staff, led by Lieutenant Colonel Max Hoffmann, an expert on the Russian army and an old acquaintance of Ludendorff's. On the night of 25th August, Hindenburg told his staff, "Gentlemen, our preparations are so well in hand that we can sleep soundly tonight." In the first 6 weeks of the war, the Russians lost more than 310,000 men. 800,000 refugees were able to return to their East Prussian homes, thanks to the victories that strikingly contrasted with the events in the West, where the Schlieffen Plan failed when the Germans retreated during the Battle of the Marne. In June, High Command ordered Hindenburg to attack in Poland north of Warsaw. Steamrolling toward the Narew River. 1/3 of the opposing Russian First Army were casualties in the first 5 hours. Hindenburg was summoned to Pless on the 28th of August, where he was named Chief of the General Staff. Hindenburg was also appointed as Supreme War Commander of the armies of the Central Powers, with nominal control of 6 million men. Hindenburg and Ludendorff visited the Western Front in September, meeting the army commanders and their staffs as well as their leaders, Crown Prince Ruprecht of Bavaria, Albrecht, Duke of Württemberg, and Crown Prince Wilhelm of Prussia. Hindenburg told them that they must stand on the defense until Romania was dealt with. Meanwhile, defensive tactics must be improved. A backup defensive line, called the Hindenburg Line, would be constructed immediately. Hindenburg detested Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg for dragging his feet about total and submarine warfare. Then in July, the Chancellor permitted the Parliament to debate a resolution for peace without annexations or amenities. The Minister of War urged Hindenburg and Ludendorff to join them, but when they arrived, the Kaiser told them that there could be no justification for their presence in Berlin. They should return in haste to headquarters, where they certainly would be much better occupied. They returned as ordered, and then immediately telegraphed their resignations, which the Kaiser declined. The crisis was resolved when the Parliament passed a modified resolution on the 19th of July. On the 8th of August, the British completely surprised them with a well-coordinated attack at Amiens, breaking well into the German lines. On the 28th of September, Hindenburg and Ludendorff told the incredulous Kaiser that the war was lost and that they must have an immediate armistice. The Austro-Hungarians were pushed back in Serbia, Albania, and Montenegro, signing an armistice on the 3rd of November. The Ottomans were overextended trying to defend Syria, while exploiting the Russian collapse to move into the Caucasus, advancing through Armenia and Georgia, intending to take over Muslim lands, despite Hindenburg urging them to defend what they had. The British and Arabs broke through in September, capturing Damascus. The armistice of Medros was signed on the 30th of October. U.S. President Wilson insisted that the Kaiser must go, but he refused to abdicate. He was determined to lead the Prussian army home to suppress the growing rebellion, which had started with large demonstrations in major cities, and then, when the Navy ordered a sortie to battle the British, mutineers led by workers and soldiers' councils took control of the Navy. Fritz Max had publicly announced his abdication, and the Social Democrat leader Friedrich Ebert was now chancellor. In February 1919, High Command moved east to Kohlberg to mount an offensive against impinging Soviet troops, but they were restrained by the Allied Occupation Administration, which in May 1919 ordered all German troops in the East home. Hindenburg retired to Hanover, Germany, once again on the 25th of June 1919, to a splendid new villa, which was a gift of the city, despite admittingly having lost the greatest war in history. In 1919, Hindenburg was subpoenaed to appear before the Parliamentary Commission investigating the responsibility for the outbreak of the war in 1914 and the defeat in 1918. Ludendorff was summoned also. They had been strangers since Ludendorff's dismissal, but they prepared and arrived together on the 18th of November 1919. On the stand, Hindenburg read through a prepared statement, ignoring the chairman's repeated demands that he answer questions. He testified that the German army had been on the verge of winning the war in the autumn of 1918, and that the defeat had been precipitated by a stab in the back by disloyal elements on the home front and unpatriotic politicians. When his reading was finished, Hindenburg walked out of the hearings despite being threatened with contempt, sure that they would not dare charge a war hero. His testimony introduced the stab in the back theory, which was adopted by the nationalists and conservative politicians who sought to blame the socialist founders of the Weimar Republic for losing the war. The first presidential election was scheduled on the 6th of June 1920. Hindenburg wrote to Wilhelm II, in exile in the Netherlands, for permission to run. Wilhelm II approved. So on the 8th of March, Paul von Hindenburg announced his intention to seek the presidency. 5 days later, Berlin was seized by regular and Free Corps troops, led by General Luttwitz, the commander of the Berlin garrison, who proclaimed a prominent civil servant, Wolfgang Kapp, president of the new government. The legal government fled without attempting any forceful response. A general strike paralyzed the nations, so after 6 days the overthrow collapsed. It was followed by a Bolshevik uprising that was put down forcefully. The parliament then canceled the election and extended Ebert's term of office until the 25th of June, 1925. Hindenburg's wife Gertrude died of cancer on the 14th of May, 1921. He kept close to his 3 children, their spouses, and his 9 grandchildren. On the 8th of November 1923, Adolf Hitler, with Ludendorff at his side, launched the beer hall overthrow in Munich, which was suppressed by the police. Hindenburg was not involved, but inevitably was prominent in newspaper reports. He issued a statement urging national unity. A new election had to be held within a month. The parties on the right established a committee to select their strongest candidate. After a week's indecision, they decided on Hindenburg, despite his advanced age. He stated his reservations, but concluded, "If you feel that my election is necessary for the sake of the fatherland, I'll run in God's name." Again he obtained Wilhelm II's approval. His campaign stressed his devotion to social justice, religious equality, genuine peace at home and abroad. No war, no integral uprising can emancipate our chained nation, which is unfortunately split by dissension. He addressed only one public meeting, held in Hanover, and gave one radio address on the 11th of April, calling for a national community under his leadership. The second election was held on the 26th of April 1925. This time Hindenburg scored the win. He took office on the 12th of May 1925, offering my hand in this hour to every German. He moved into the elegant presidential palace accompanied by his son Oscar, his wife, and 3 children. On the 1st of December 1925, the Locarno Treaties were signed, a significant step in restoring Germany's position in Europe. On 18th of September 1927, Hindenburg spoke at the dedication of a massive memorial at Tannenberg, outraging international opinion by denying Germany's responsibility for initiating the 4 Years' War, as it was called in Germany. He declared that Germany entered the war as the means of self-assertion against a world full of enemies. Pure in heart, we set off to the defense of the fatherland, and with clean hands the German army carried the sword. The Allied governments retaliated with a childish act by not congratulating him on his 80th birthday. Most Germans did celebrate his birthday, though. The Parliament's 4-year term was coming to an end, so Hindenburg pressed them to promptly pass needed legislation. The election on the 20th of May 1928 produced a shift to the left, although a handful of Nazis were elected. Hindenburg tried to assemble the next government by obtaining enough support from political parties while retaining essential ministers such as Gruner and Statesman, but was unable to form a working combination. A new election would only reinforce these bitter divisions. Schlemmer proposed a solution, a government in which the Chancellor would be responsible to the President rather than the Parliament, based on the so-called 25-48-53 formula, named for the 3 articles of the Constitution that could make such a presidential government possible. Article 25 allowed the President to dissolve the Parliament. Article 48 allowed the President to sign emergency bills into law without the consent of the Parliament. However, the Parliament could cancel any law passed by Article 48 by a simple majority vote within 6 days of its passage. Article 53 allowed the President to appoint the Chancellor. Hindenburg met Adolf Hitler for the first time in October 1931 at a high-level conference in Berlin, Germany. Everyone present saw that they took an immediate dislike to each other. Afterwards, Hindenburg referred to Hitler in private as that Austrian corporal, that Bohemian corporal, or sometimes simply as the corporal. For his part, Hitler often labeled Hindenburg as that old fool or that old reactionary. By January 1932, at age 84, Hindenburg was thinking about running for a second term. Hindenburg was persuaded to run and was supported by the Center Party, the DVP, and the Social Democratic Party of Germany, which regarded him as the only hope of defeating Adolf Hitler. Hindenburg left most of the campaigning to others. In his single radio address, he stressed the need for unity. I recall the spirit of 1914 and the mood at the front, which asked about the man and not about his class or party. Hitler, on the other hand, campaigned vigorously throughout Germany. In the first round of voting in March 1932, Hindenburg was the front runner, but failed to gain the required majority. In the runoff the following months, Hindenburg won with 53% of the vote. Hitler soon obtained Hindenburg's confidence, promising that after Germany regained full sovereignty, the monarchy would be restored. The opening of the new parliament was celebrated with a Nazi extravaganza. Hindenburg descended into the crypt of the old garrison church in Potsdam to commune with the spirit of Frederick the Great at his grave, attended by Hitler, whom saluted the president as the custodian of the new rise of our people. By summer 1934, Hindenburg was dying of metastasized bladder cancer, and his correspondence was dominated by complaints of Nazi stormtroopers running amok. So Hindenburg asked Hitler to rein them in. Immediately after the stormtroopers' leaders were murdered during the Night of the Long Knives, Hindenburg thanked Hitler for his firm measures. Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934. Contrary to his will, was interred with his wife in a magnificent ceremony at the Tannenberg Memorial. In 1944, as the Russians approached, Lieutenant General Oskar von Hindenburg moved his parents' remains to Western Germany. After World War II, the Poles razed the Tannenberg Memorial to the ground. The remains of Hindenburg and his wife nowadays lie buried in St. Elizabeth's Church in Marburg, Hesse, Germany.